Creating the Constitution. Today we're going to talk about how the colonists created the Constitution, or the governing document that we still use today. In the beginning, a 55-member delegation gathered in Philadelphia, charged with revising the Articles of Confederation, or the weak government that was not working out. 12 of the 13 colonies sent delegates to the convention. Rhode Island, which felt that changing the articles might hurt the economy, did not send any representatives. Those who did attend, known as the Founding Fathers, included prominent citizens such as George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and James Madison. The founders had a lot of political experience. Some of them had been instrumental in creating their own state constitutions, and most had served in the National Congress. These were some of the greatest minds at the time. Basically, they were political superheroes. The failure of the Articles had taught them that a stronger government was necessary, but most were still apprehensive about creating a government with too much power. They needed to find a balance. There were many issues that had to be addressed at the convention. Revising the Articles would require the agreement of every single state. Rather than amend this document, they decided it might be easier just to throw it out and write a whole new one, a constitution. The first issue, or major argument that came up, surrounded representation in Congress. Different states were arguing about how we should decide how many representatives each state had and how many they could send to Congress. Small states supported what is known as the New Jersey Plan. If you don't know your geography, New Jersey is a pretty small state. This plan stated that all states would be equally represented in Congress, no matter their population. This is good news for small states because even though they had smaller populations, they would get just as much say as a large state would. Obviously, large states did not like the sound of this. They supported what is known as the Virginia Plan. Virginia is a pretty large state. Under this plan, a state's representation would be based on its population, thus giving larger states more representatives in Congress. A compromise was necessary to create a system that's going to work for both sides. The Connecticut Compromise, sometimes also called the Great Compromise, stated that Congress would be bicameral. They would have two houses, one called the House of Representatives and the other called the Senate. The House of Representatives would have its membership based on population, thus giving more representatives to larger states or more populated states. The Senate would have equal representation. All states would have 2 senators regardless of size and population. So for example, today, Ohio has about 16 representatives in the House, whereas Montana, though they're a large state, they have a very small population. They only have 1 representative in the House. California has 53 representatives because they have such a large population. On the flip side, every single one of those states only gets to send 2 representatives to the Senate. California has 2, Montana has 2, and Ohio has 2. Another major argument about representation centered around the counting of slaves. Southern states wanted slaves to be counted toward their population so they could get more representatives. Even though slaves couldn't vote, Southerners felt that they should be counted as part of the population. Northern states were opposed to this idea. They didn't want Southern states using it to their advantage in order to get more representatives. The Three-Fifths Compromise created a system in which 3/5 of all slaves would be counted toward the population. Eventually, the 13th Amendment freed slaves, and this law no longer applied. Because of the decision to change the Articles was partially motivated by the economic problems, issues relating to the economy were a big priority. The founders decided Congress should have some economic powers. They were given the right to borrow money, collect taxes, regulate business, coin money, declare war, set voting qualifications, and create and maintain a military. The delegates also made some important decisions relating to many other issues. They created a national court system, or the judicial branch of government. They also created an executive officer in the position of president, the executive branch. At the time, this branch was just one person, but it's definitely grown today to include lots of cabinet members and other important people. They also set rules for how the 3 branches of the new government would prevent each other from abusing their powers. These are known as checks and balances. One of the most important authors of the Constitution was James Madison, who later became one of our presidents. His idea of government, called the Madisonian model, laid a plan for how the government would be structured. Madison wanted to establish a republic rather than a direct democracy. He did not feel that the masses or the common people could be trusted to make many of the decisions that government must make. Madison also contributed the ideas of separation of powers and checks and balances. While they were making the Constitution, eventually 2 factions formed. It took the delegates many weeks to iron out this new plan, but then they had to convince the states that they needed to ratify the document. The 2 groups that formed were called the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists were a group who supported the new Constitution and its federal system of government. They supported that stronger central government that worked together with the states. They were largely the elite of society, or those who were educated and wealthy. The Anti-Federalists were against the new Constitution because they wanted more rights for the states. A group of Federalists, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay, wrote and published many famous documents called the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers were documents written in support of the proposed Constitution. They were trying to convince people to vote to ratify the document. This series of 85 articles gave a clear analysis of the philosophy behind the Constitution and clearly explained why things were written the way they were. These documents give us a strong sense of the thoughts the Founding Fathers had when they created our Constitution and why they did things the way they did. The Anti-Federalists still believed that the Constitution was harmful to the lower class. They felt the document gave too much power to the central government, which would be run by the elite, and took power away from the state governments. They felt this shift in power would harm the individual liberties of American citizens. They went on to argue that a list of rights that would protect the individual liberties of citizens must be added to the Constitution. Conceding this point, Federalists promised to add a Bill of Rights in order to gain support in the ratification of the Constitution. This Bill of Rights was actually modeled after the English Bill of Rights, where we got many of our ideas. Eventually, all the states did ratify the document, and the Constitution became our new official government of the United States of America.